This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. In this podcast, I talk to women entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey about the challenges, the highs, the lows, and what they've learned along the way. We'll also hear from experts who share valuable tips on how to succeed the smart way. Let's jump in. Have you ever been frustrated by how much money we spend on healthcare, and yet how bureaucratic and inefficient the system is? Or wondered why nobody's fixing it? The good news is somebody already is. And it's an amazing woman, no less, who's also an accomplished doctor. In this episode, radiologist and tech entrepreneur Aneesa Majid talks about how her frustrations with an antiquated healthcare system that still sends billions of faxes prompted her to found Zipdata. Listen to Aneesa's hard-won insights on how she manages a tech startup as a CEO, what she recommends that women and minority founders do to improve their funding prospects, where she gets high-value advice on game-changing money matters with her startup, and much more. Now, here's Aneesa. Hi, Aneesa. Thanks very much for joining us on Invisible Inc. today. We're delighted to have you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So you have a pretty interesting background. When I first looked you up, you're a radiologist, you have an MBA, you founded more than one company in the past. Can you tell us how this whole journey transpired and what got you into entrepreneurship in the first place?
So for me, I think there was a natural evolution and there was a market change for me to go and start my own private practice with a couple of people. I would never in a million years think that I was going to start a private practice on my own. But that's what the situation at the time presented. And I felt was the right thing to go. And whether it's a private practice or it's a startup or it's a tech startup, it's all kind of the same principles. And that's where I really fell into quote unquote entrepreneurship. Simultaneously, 4 colleagues and I had several years before said, let's try and make this app just to solve this one problem, thinking it was much easier than we thought. And then we, kind of fell down this rabbit hole of what really the problem is and why nobody had really solved it. And we chose to kind of keep going and try to learn and try to solve it. And that's how we have evolved the company of Zipdata. It's definitely something that has evolved. I think the experience of doing it once allows you the confidence to continue to learn, get better, and take the skills that you learn on one side and try to apply it to another side.
So what is Zipdata and what does the company do?
So Zipdata is on a mission to kill the fax machine in healthcare communications. What a lot of people don't know is that we spend about $9 billion on fax and phone, and that doesn't really kind of count all of the operational costs and the delays to make that happen. The reason for that is because everybody is required, whether you're an enterprise system like Northwestern, Memorial Sloan Kettering, to have an information system and an electronic health record, but nobody is required to make those systems talk to each other. And in order to make them talk to each other, the people who own those systems, whether it's Cerner or Epic or eClinicalWorks or the smaller companies, that's a capitalist option for them, right? So they're going to charge for each pipe that you want to connect to somewhere. So a physician practices in particular, that's very costly. They would have to pay anywhere from $5,000, in some cases $20,000 per pipe to make those connections. And that's just insanity. And as physicians and consumers of healthcare ourselves, who have had to deal with the delays of faxing, of getting patients in, and also the business side, the operational costs of faxing, of how many people you have to pay to try to get paper in and data entry it, and then make sure that things get done right, it needs to be solved. It's ridiculous. We're in 2022 and we are still dealing with fax in one of the biggest GDP industries of the country. And for COVID, we really saw that it caused a lot of delay in care, just in getting test results. And now in the new work environment, of hybrid, of wanting to work from home, of still not out of the pandemic and people maybe needing at this point 5 or 10 days to quarantine. Maybe we'll get to 3. Either way, you're losing staff that have to be on premise to take paper and enter it into an information system. So Zip Data removes all of that by taking AI and ML and using technology that's there, a virtual print driver, OCR readers, all of that stuff to be information system agnostic from the doctor side, as well as to the receiving information side, and be able to just transfer the important pieces of information, whether that's me sending you a request for MRI or referral for orthopedic surgery or oncology or whatever, to decrease this.
So you mentioned that you had started down the path a few years ago, and then you're once again down the path of entrepreneurship. Were there any connecting dots between your first startup and this that you kind of just picked up, or was this like a de novo idea that you had to start from scratch while you were practicing?
The Zip Data was a de novo idea that evolved for the 5 of us while we were practicing. Honestly, we were trying to solve the problem for ourselves. We were business owners, owned an imaging center, paid 5 FTEs to handle phone, fax, and scheduling. And that's a significant amount for one imaging center. And when you really go down the pathway for it, you'll find that most practices have, if it's one location, about 3 to 5 FTEs to handle this. A larger practice that I know that's in the Northeast corridor, large orthopedic practice, they have 2 locations, 5 faxes, 3 to 5 FTEs. So it becomes super, super burdensome. And so our idea of, hey, this should be quick. We can make an app. We just want our referring physicians to be able to know that it's easier to order for us than anybody else. A market competition really led to, this is a super huge problem. Nobody's really solved it. Why haven't they solved it? Why can't we solve it? And are we in the best position to solve it since we deal with it every day?
So I now see the identification of the problem. You feel the pain. What happens next? I mean, you're doctors. You guys are not, you mentioned AI and ML. You're not technical experts.
Yeah, that's not us, right? So we had to sit there and kind of figure out, like, what do we know? We know we needed to make an entity. We needed to figure out where we were going to put money in to pay for initial development. We knew we needed to find lawyers and developers. But at the end of the day, we knew that we needed to get somebody else, because we were working full time, to pay for this as a side gig, to kind of be our interim CEO and help us take concept to product to market. And so in that process, we learned a ton, that there were things like fractional CEOs, what the process is, how do you kind of figure out developing companies, what is the difference between having somebody here and a team in India, having a full team in India or offshore, what are these costs overall? And then started learning about other little aspects of the business. Do we need insurance at this phase? Do we not? What's a board look like? How do we go about having an advisory board? Do we need that now? Do we need that later? And then kind of getting to the point where it's like, okay, we're willing to put in X to see if this idea is viable. Well, once we get to X and it's viable, now what do we do? And that took us down the path of, okay, well, here are the different ways that we learn how to start up. So it's been kind of a step-by-step thing to every step for us in terms of the evolution of what does the solution need to be, and then dealing with different forces. For instance, we kind of started this around 2013, 2014, and got a product from scratch ready to market in about 3 or 4 years. And obviously, it took me a long time to learn this, but a digital solution like this that changes the way all of the market works, well, it's going to take 8 to 10 years anyway. But we were ready to do our MVP in 2019, and we did. But then we were ready to sell, and then we had COVID. Well, and we're never going to be able to sell in COVID when all of our target customers are having a hit in their revenue. You know, when we stop medical care, everybody's revenue goes down. Well, they're not going to look to invest in something, even if it might seem like it would be great if we had that solution right now. So we've had to adjust along the way. And I think a large reason why we're still here is because We believe in the product. We believe in the fine tuning that we've done for it. We've watched it sell itself when we present it to non-healthcare people and healthcare people in terms of a solution.
Is it fair to say that you're still practicing as a physician while you're managing this on the side?
Fair to say, yes. It takes a long time to generate revenue. It takes a longer time than, say, a consumer product. So a non-consumer product in the healthcare field takes a longer time as a solution product to get the traction, which means it takes a longer time to fundraise, particularly when a lot of the fundraising opportunities are really more focused for biotech, medtech, life sciences, all of those type of tech, digital health tech solutions. That's not our world. And so now we have to deal with proving that the market wants it and whatever traction means to an investor.
Got it. One other question about kind of how this evolved. You mentioned that there were 5 of you in the practice and all of you are kind of all in to this. How does that play out with physicians are not normally entrepreneurs other than the fact that they run their own practices if they're in private practice? How has that dynamic worked out through this process?
What we have evolved to is, whereas in the beginning, all of us were like at every meeting, all in, all of this stuff, trying to learn at the same time. What it's really evolved to is, what do people have inherent strengths to? So one of our founders is a much more technically thinking founder and did informatics and benefit management and all this stuff. And so he was really able to be involved in more of the nitty-gritty of building the design and guiding a tech team and working with our previous CEO on that. And then one of our founders started her own practice. She's very good at marketing and branding. What does that presentation look like? And even if it's not her to do the website or do any of that, but the feedback and finding the right people to do that has been helpful. And one of our founders is very good one-on-one client facing. So when it comes to talking to salespeople and helping train them and bring them forward and then be in more client-facing meetings, that's where he comes in. And, we don't really expect much of each of them on other things because everybody's working and we want everybody to work to their strengths. And that's how you make a good team. One of our founders is just kind of a fill-in here or there and all this stuff. And then because of my MBA and my other experiences, I've taken over during the pandemic as a growth CEO.
So did you have any concerns jumping in other than the fact that you're trying to manage essentially 2 full-time jobs? Did you have any concerns about your skills, the risks you were taking, anything like that? And how do you
I think you have concerns about that every day, multiple times a day overall. And there's some good days and there's some bad days. I think that there is some comfort to the fact that you have a job that's paying to help you sustain to do all these other things. And I think for me, having gotten an executive MBA and having to time manage that really allows me to be able to multitask in a day and keep on every day being a CEO of a company, but still be able to do my practice. I'm also in a unique practice situation where I do cases and I'm in between cases, so things can be kind of juggled and controlled a little bit better. But I think that's one of the great keys for doing an MBA later while you're an executive, is like an executive MBA, is that the time management part to be really efficient really helps you. But there's concerns every day. There's a risk every day, right? Particularly for us as through all of kind of the ups and downs of what we've learned to be a tech company, which is in our area, but knowing what it can solve and going through a CEO change and going through the pandemic, now we're really kind of primed to go. And so that kind of keeps us going.
You talked quite a bit about product and getting traction with your customer market and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed your business model? How did you come up with the right revenue model?
Yeah, at the end of the day, when you strip everything away from what we're trying to solve, we end up being a B2B software service solution model. We are a software solution and we're dealing with volume. and operational costs. And so our business model from the very beginning, because of the volume that we were dealing with, was always going to be a subscription model with some one-time onboarding fees, and then trying to provide within that model as much service as we could, so that it's not like after 3 years, you're going to pay for this level of upgrade. We're just going to keep the product iterated and updated and provide service. So that's how we came to this revenue generating business model. And then fine tuning how that gets priced out, that takes some time and has required some mentorship, I feel, between either my school, my business school network, and other people who have built software as service solution sales. And so while we initially started to think that, well, it has to be how many clicks per month, and we're looking at billions of clicks happening in overall, it's very hard to price that effectively. So we've evolved to be like, well, what's your cost that you're saving? How many people are doing this? What are they paying for that? How can you price it by saying, hey, listen, instead of paying for XYZ, pay us X per month and for however many clicks you do. And the benefit to that for us is that we don't have to count clicks. It's far more kind of laborious for us to make somebody on our tech side count clicks or create the automation to make those clicks. And as we start to build the infrastructure of the company, we made our product, but as you start to build the infrastructure of the company to go from sales to accounting and billing and invoicing, how do you make that as a software? That's to me the bigger challenge as a software service thing which is if you don't have a consumer product like Dropbox, how do you go from sales to accounting, invoicing every month and make that simple? And the simpler way is to say, we are solving your problem on operational costs and improving your efficiency. So we are going to say, year one, it's this, year two, it's that, year three, it's this, and there we go. Allowing for year one will probably take a certain amount of time to onboard, and as they expand, whatever. But that's how we have evolved to our business model and our pricing model.
That's incredibly helpful. So selling into the healthcare market, and especially selling to healthcare systems, from what I've heard from other entrepreneurs, there's this argument that needs to be made in terms of, is it 5x or 10x your initial investment? Do you face that issue as well when selling into health systems?
Yes and no. We have approached it from an entirely different perspective, which is we have approached it from what are the workflow inefficiencies we solve? What is the operational costs we solve? And presenting it 100% as solution in a non-enterprise world. So I think a lot of the times when people are talking about 5x and 10x, they're also talking about enterprise systems, because everybody loves to talk about healthcare and enterprise systems, the Northwesterns and the Advocates and the Memorial Sloan Ketterings, right? That's what everybody loves to talk about. And also for when you start saying software as service, everybody loves enterprise accounts. But the reality is when we fell upon this idea, we were one little practice with one location that was paying 5 FTEs to handle paper and dealing with the fallout of not getting a patient in a timely manner or not getting something approved and all that stuff. So when we look at it in terms of, great, if we can get some enterprise traction, but we look at it as the rest of medicine, which is the majority of medicine. Like if you look at Ottawa, Illinois, where I grew up, is not an enterprise place, but every one of those doctors has an electronic health record system. Every one of them is sending faxes back and forth. Well, that's revenue for us at a very high rate. We can break into that market, and our margin is only sales because our product is developed and has fixed costs now. It will only be iterated to whatever it needs to be. Well, that's your fixed cost of development. So other than bonus metrics for sales, everybody else that comes into the company is going to have a salary, make the appropriate end of year bonus, move forward. But our margin is really going to be to incentivize our sales. So we look at it very differently and really didn't bring in 5x and 10x costs because we're not looking at the enterprise world. Great if we get it, but we're more likely to be able to get a small regional hospital. Let's take Midland Memorial Hospital in Texas. There's nothing really around it. They are the center of the healthcare world in that town. All of the outpatient imaging, all of the surgeons, everybody is in that professional building. Then it's a different calculation of 5x, 10x.
So the flip side of it is, at least from the outside, it looks like the health market is getting more concentrated. So my neighborhood practice got bought over by a hospital. I'm seeing that increasingly after ACA. How does that impact the potential and the upside for your business? And is the emergence of bigger health systems a risk to you? Is it an opportunity, or are you neutral to that?
We're pretty neutral because we're still dealing with the facts. So even if like a smaller hospital, a smaller practices get bought out and now they're part of patient first primary care, particularly in the primary care world, they're still sending faxes. And who are they sending faxes to? Orthopedic surgeons, physical therapists, lab, hematology, oncology, all of that stuff. So you're still dealing, from our perspective, between two disconnected information systems. And so every sort of entity has an information system, and every entity is either receiving faxes from a non-connected system or they're sending. And that's how we look at it. Ultimately, what we're trying to really build it to is to say, this is the Pentium chip that you need in all your systems. Because it's very niche. It's not very sexy, right? Like if you go to Matter 1871 and all this stuff, and people are doing all these like kind of sexy AI, ML, all these things, and they're solving diabetes things here and heart disease here and all of that stuff. That's all great. But at the end of the day, a lot of our waste in healthcare is in the infrastructure and how we go about it. And a lot of our patient care delays are also in that. A lot of our patients being lost in the system is frustration of patients that, they never heard back and they don't know what's going on. And why do I have to fax a million more things and all of that stuff? But why do they have to fax a million things? They have an electronic health record when they went to go see their doctor. Isn't everything there? Didn't they already say that every single time? It's reasonable frustration. It's also very frustrating from our side, from the doctor side, like, well, we don't have this information. I can't properly read. I need more information. It's also very frustrating when you bring the behemoth of insurance in. I had a patient not get their authorization done because somebody said, oh, it was missing this piece of paper. And if we don't have everything, we just shred it all. And then you're just going to have to send it all to us again. Seriously? Because at the end of the day, for us, it's still a patient at the end of all of that paper. And so at the end of the day, for us, what's really kind of kept us driving forward on this is that we know ultimately it will help patient care to get patients scheduled faster. We also know it will help patient care if their doctor's office isn't constantly interrupted in their workflow with phone calls to get things sent to them, which leads to burnout and frustration. And then we haven't even touched on, like, there's no HIPAA, there's no security. Like, there are multiple things that this can solve. But at the end of the day, we personally, as patients and as physicians who have seen patients get delayed or denied or whatever, know that this solution can lead to that. And that's ultimately what we want.
Changing gears slightly, talk about acquiring customers. It certainly, I think, helps that you guys are all physicians yourself. What was that process? How did you tackle it? And what have you learned through that process? And where have you evolved to?
The process is difficult, but it's not difficult for the same reasons that you always hear, which is, oh, doctors don't like to try anything new. That is not actually the problem. The problem is that healthcare in general does not like to change technology because of cost and because of the downtime that could happen by introducing something. And also just the frustrations that people have experienced. And that's mostly with a larger electronic health record system, but everything has its deal. So that's one of the things we considered when we were building this is how easy is this? How many clicks? How long, what's the patience of somebody to use this? How many clicks? How easy is it to install? How fast can we get it installed? All of that. But in terms of customer acquisition, we initially went down a pathway of let's take our one vertical of radiology. Let's talk to the information systems that are in the imaging centers. Let's work with one of them, integrate with one of them, and distribute to the imaging centers they're at. It was a good concept. It's very hard to put it in place because we are really at the last mile of sale into that selling process. And unless we can be there at that last part of it, like in the pitches or interfacing with their customers, we can't always get them to use our product. Because when you're selling your product as a startup or person, you're the people who sell it best because you're passionate about it, you know all the details about it, you know all of that. And so to kind of hand it off to a distributor and they're like, oh yeah, we pitched your product. We pitched your product to 200 people. Well, then what's the return on investment? It's not really there unless we pitch our product. And then when they're integrating, we're there to show them, look how easy this is. And so in our first foray down that path, and it was helpful to us because they also helped us with our MVP and we got really good feedback and results and all this stuff. But in our first foray down that path in terms of a revenue generation model, it was not helpful. So it might be something that we return to as we grow, depending, because now we've learned what we would need up front, what assurances we would need up front in terms of how the partnership would be structured. So the second way to do it is how most software as service companies do it, which is just dialing for dollars and putting out an account executive that handles everything and getting traction that way, and then growing from there to different avenues of directly selling to an information system and just saying, okay, integrate our product and here's how we can market with you and move forward. And so that's actually what we have pivoted to and are starting to do now in terms of growing our customer acquisition. But what's the good thing about being in an industry that is hesitant to change technology is once they get you, your churn is very low. It's the getting in part. The other thing that I think we have more of an advantage than, say, other people out here for this is we understand the workflows. So we're actually not going to go to doctors to try to do this. We're going to go to their office managers and their IT administrators, and we're going to pitch to them because they actually understand the nuances of the workflow that's interrupted. And they're usually the people, their PA, their MP, their front desk person, who are actually sending these faxes. So that's also a very specific way that we're going about targeting our clients.
We talked earlier about funding, and you mentioned that you use the proceeds from your practice to fund the business. I imagine that the funding needs at some point either have already outgrown or will outgrow what the practice can put in. So can you talk a little bit about what your funding approach is? What has that been like for you? What have been your learnings from that process?
Funding has been really hard and painful. And we went pretty far, about 360K in, just amongst the 5 founders, before we started talking about outside funding. And the first thing we did was friends and family with the option of founders to invest in, which at that time would have been considered seed, which it's not anymore. So I find fundraising to be a little bit like Charlie Brown in the football. It's constantly moving and never stable. So we raised a good amount that way. And then we got close to running out of funds. One of our founders provided a line of credit. One of our investors, again, friends and family, provided a promissory note with very favorable terms. During the pandemic, we had another convertible note. We've been very creative about raising funds, but also keeping it within our family and friends. That works until you get to purely ready to run growth, in which case you need higher operational capital. And then you have to start looking at what would be now seed funding. And seed funding can be anywhere from $500,000 up to $1.5 or $2 million, as long as you know what you're putting that for. And I think it's the classic thing. Well, how long will this money run you and what will you accomplish in that time? And that's really kind of where we've been. And it's been hard just because fundraising gets easier the next time you try to fundraise after you've had a successful exit. Because you've met all these investors, you have warm contacts, they know that you're an easier thing, and all of a sudden checks get written for $500,000 and $1 million much faster. But when you're in our stage, and we started out of Dallas, which Texas is not an entrepreneurial hotbed, it is starting to be. Austin is really the kind of center of that. Then you really have to work even harder to start building your networks. And that's a lot of what I have spent a lot of time during the pandemic downturn to do, which is to expand the network. So for instance, we joined a growth accelerator, new chip growth accelerator in Austin, actually. And that's something where what I know now is something like Techstars or something like that a little earlier in our development, I think would have been helpful. It's something we just didn't know. And by the time we knew about them, Rock Health, Techstars, a lot of these Y Combinator, which gets touted a lot, we were just too mature product wise and actually kind of too far down the company development path to really benefit from those scenarios, as well as like Y Combinator at that time, pre-pandemic, we would have had to give up 6 months and be out there. And that wasn't something that we could do. Whereas during the pandemic and now post-pandemic, the virtual options are so much greater that the access to that is so much better. But I circle back to Techstars a lot. And every time I circle back to it, we're not a match for it. So then you have to really work on who are the people that are like in our level seed funders or working through, like we did not join 1871 earlier in our development, but we joined it when they developed their growth program, because that's when we felt like it was more of a match. Because as you know, every one of these programs requires a financial investment to some extent too, to grow that network. So that's something that you have to put into your operational costs of like, well, we want to be a member of 1871. Well, that's X. It's the same thing for, well, what's the cost of investor data? Do you just use Crunchbase? Or do you invest in like a Lead Loft or PitchBook? And really, I think the amount of things that get thrown at you, the more you grow into different stages of your company that you have to spend time kind of searching through, has been also a big learning experience for us to figure out. So we chose to invest in PitchBook data and have an intern who's going through that data to sort it out and figure out how we can be more effective at sending a good email to a potential investor that would be more aligned with where we are. And I think that's also something that is a big learning curve, because people will tell you, this is how you send a cold email. Saster, well, Jason Lemkins, this is how you send a cold email. And if I got this cold email, I invest. Yeah, but who are you sending it to? Like, how do you figure out the right investors to send to, and how do you navigate to that? And that's where I think a network like Kellogg or 1871 or Matter becomes very helpful to help you kind of discern where you have to spend your time for that. Otherwise, you're sending a lot of emails, you're getting no response, you don't really know why. And that can lead to burnout and founder fatigue very quickly.
So, a couple of questions in terms of follow-up. Earlier on, you mentioned promissory notes, convertible notes. You're a doctor. When did you figure all this out, and how did you learn the ins and outs of, okay, what's a promissory note? How do I structure a deal, like a friends and family funding deal? It could be equity, it could be debt, it could be convertible debt. How did you learn all that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I personally am a big fan of spending on is legal advice from the very get-go. And you don't have to spend a ton of money. Like I know there's a corporation that we have learned about through New Chip, and that's where some of these early accelerators like Techstars and stuff like that, and then even growth accelerators, you have also an exposure to a bunch of things that give you good deals and discounts at the startup thing. So I know there's like an organization called Savvy Legal can help with all of that and help teach you all of that. But for us, we chose to have a legal counsel local when we set up our entities and for each step of the way. And then I think you try to find a group, a practice counsel that you can grow with, because then they have your history and they can help you grow. And it hasn't been easy. Lawyers leave. I was with a firm and I went over here and you have to decide what you're going to do. There's also things like I got my MBA, but even with that, Investopedia, the whole startup world is a whole different world. Understanding safe notes versus convertible notes and how the valuation cap is. What do they mean when they're talking about valuation caps? Are they talking about pre-valuation? Are they talking about post-investment valuation? Like that was a whole new one. I had to sit down. I had to go through all of that. Convertible notes, why is that good before a safe note? Why would you not want that? That's interest bearing. Safe notes are not. So these are all things that we had to kind of go through and learn. Then the other thing is, even for founders, like once you get your friends and family investors, it was, okay, we need a cash call to keep the lights on. Well, how does that get structured? And for us, that got structured as convertible notes because we took risks early, and that has an interest component to that note that benefits us for taking that risk early. But now, as we go to, say, a seed round, and we're going to get more institutional investors, they have a full product. They're going to invest into a sales team, a product, a cybersecurity already set, a CTO, a development team. They're not taking as much risk as we took to put these things in place. So they get a safe note, right? They get a safe note to help us get to a Series A when everybody converts to full equity. And so these are just things that we've kind of picked up along the way in terms of, well, how do we show that founders put in this money and how will that convert and show that they have X amount of equity because they did it?
And that brings up an interesting point, 2 points. One is you said you learned a lot about these notes. Was that through reading books like Brad Feld's book? Was it through your participation at 1871 or Matter? What was your best, or what's your best resource for somebody to go in and learn about this in an efficient way?
Honestly, my best resource was my legal counsel. They really, I mean, I did some reading. I talked to some people at Kellogg. I did my own Google search, convertible notes, startup funding all the way down. But when we started getting the tit for tat part of it all, our legal counsel was like, listen, if you do this, this is how it's going to play out. And this is what the note's going to read. And if you do this, this is what it's going to read. And this is how that's going to work. And let's run down the path of what does that look like at a seed round or a Series A round. And I thought that that was probably the most helpful. And I think that's where having your, even if it's not an official advisory board to the startup, which I don't know, we don't have one, but we have our advisors that some of those are my own personal advisors in different areas. But having, as a CEO or founder, your own personal advisors, whether they officially are listed or not, is very helpful to guide you along that. And it might even be to be like, hey, listen, this friend of mine, and I've had this friend of mine had these 3 exits, talk to them. You talk to everybody you can talk to. And maybe through that conversation, they get you connected to somebody who really helps you. And that's like our sales team that's coming on board. I think talent acquisition channels are something we don't talk about a lot in terms of the nuts and bolts of how to figure out how to find them. There's a lot of people who talk about what type of talent you need or how to retain talent or how to set up contracts for talent. But when you're a software service person, you're like, we need salespeople. We did it totally wrong. We went to our sales reps that we knew in healthcare. We're like, they understand the field, they sell, We brought them on, we did all this work, we trained them on HubSpot, and they were like, okay, well, we want to go into the offices. I was like, this is solution sales. What you need to be calling. This is not a catheter where you need to go show it. Like, you can do this virtually. No, we need these handouts. And so I was like, no, we're not aligned here. We got to start from scratch. And so there were a couple of people who had reached out to me who said, call me anytime. And it was one of my low points. And I called everybody and they connected me with the people that we're working with now. And I talked to them about talent acquisition. And then it turned out that they offered services. This was their niche. Their niche was helping tech companies and software service companies build their sales team. And they were experts at setting up HubSpot. And they bring on the BDRs and they work for them. And we control our payroll and payroll costs. And that's how that happened, is somebody said, talk to this person.
My other question is, there's some data that I've seen out there that says that when it comes to negotiating equity stakes, women founders end up settling for less. Can you talk about any observations you have on that, any advice, any perspectives?
From a CEO minority female founder who's been pitching, I 100% think it's harder to get the checks. And I've talked to a lot of people about that. I feel like that we have shown traction in a lot of different ways without necessarily the revenue part of it, in terms of accepted into Accelerator, accepted by Oracle for startups, accepted by Microsoft for startups, have an NDA, have a commitment for $2 million client to come on this year, and we're still not getting a check. I feel like a male would have had a check and said, oh yeah, you're going. We're not talking about, like I said, product development. We're talking about infrastructure building. We're talking about people development, right? It's really just, we can grow if we have money to put people in place to help us grow. And I feel like those numbers of how many pitches it takes before female founder as the face of the company gets the checks is true. I think that in terms of equity stakes, we have good legal counsel to prevent something like that from happening. And I think, again, that's why having legal counsel that you trust and can grow with you is very helpful. Also, I am not the sole founder, right? So I have 3 men on the founding team. And that changes also the dynamics in terms of when we actually go to close the deal, is that we are a very diverse founding team, from white male to non-white female and immigrant and LGBTQ in between. So we check a lot of boxes. So I think that once we get to the point where people are like, yeah, we're ready to write the check, which we're pretty close to, then that concern for us about equity isn't as big. If I was a sole female founder or me and a female partner, I would be more concerned that I would be more taken advantage.
To those who are in that position, do you have any advice or observations, any remarks on how they might overcome some of those challenges?
So I think that there are some really good organizations. One of them that I'll promote here called Scroobius, SCROOBIOUS, which is run out of Boston by Allison Byers. And she is a female founder herself of this company, but also having done pitches and done fundraising. And from that, she has developed a program for a very effective video pitch. So I worked with her, like I sent her a video pitch, we worked, and how do we fine tune this pitch? How do we get this to 5 minutes or less? What are the things that you can take out so that instead of sending a pitch deck, you send the video link? I think that's really good. But it's also an organization that is very dedicated to providing resources to female founders and underrepresented minorities. And I think that there are several other organizations that are starting to do that. And the best thing is to start working with those organizations as much as you can. They're very focused about it, right? 1871 is great. 1871 has a component to this, but it's not its only focus. Whereas here, what Allison has built with Scroobius and what other then in her network, right? Then her network opens up to several other of those networking things, and starting to expand that outside of Boston or whatever is very helpful. And then back to the legal advice, this is where it's very important to have legal that gets you. So there's legal, but there's not to say that there isn't implicit bias with legal also. Everybody has implicit bias. So you want to make sure that your legal team is not pushing you to be like, no, this is a great deal, just take this and then you can build on it. At every stage, it has to be, what's the best deal for me and the company that lets us grow? I now gravitate more and more to organizations like that, like Scroobius and others, and their network and their LinkedIn and their Twitter's connections to find support and openings that are not the traditional, like PitchBook is PitchBook. You need to do something like that. But that is more research oriented to know that you are targeting the right investor. And it's very in depth, and no founder can do it by themselves. We have an intern saying, like, you can go all the way through, see the deal, see who they made a deal to try to get the warm intro and all this stuff. But organizations like Scroobius are very dedicated to effective pitching, as well as providing opportunities to pitch and providing support, whether that's marketing support, all these things to women and underrepresented minorities, I think is a much better way to go. And there's a lot out there for African American females, for Latino females as well. So I think finding those organizations are really going to be more helpful. And we have to look at those rather than the traditional paths that everybody says you should follow.
Excellent. This was very informative. Thanks for that. So a couple last questions before we wrap. One, we talked a lot about the external challenges. I think we have a pretty good picture. How about some of your own internal struggles? Were there any dark moments, or at least particularly noteworthy dark moments?
I think every day you have some doubts. I was very hesitant to take over when our CEO chose to leave, and it was a little bit without warning. We weren't expecting that notice. At that time, I had a lot of doubt that I could step into the role because my strengths aren't tech. I'm not the tech CEO, I'm the growth CEO. I'm about marketing and branding and sales and operational efficiency and organizational structure. So I had a lot of concerns there. I think there's a lot of stress also because our friends and family have invested in this. Failure means all of us lose the money that we've put in, and it's not insignificant because we've been dealing with digital tech. That was my biggest thing, which was like, yeah, I did get an MBA. Yeah, I am a doctor, but really having to put pedal to the metal and be like, okay, can we do this? Here's your chance to put some things in place. Can you do it? How will you do it? How are we going to balance this? All of that. That was probably biggest for me personally. I think also for the company, also that was our biggest challenge. A second was trying to figure out our initial customer distributor partnership, ending it, because that was still some revenue for us. And ending it would mean we would be without revenue for a period of time until we regrouped. And was that going to be worth it to do? It took a lot for us to get to that decision. Really, it took us a year from the time I took over as CEO to get to that decision. And my instinct was, this isn't working for us. It hasn't been working. We have to figure out why it's not working. And if we can't fix it, we need to get out of this because we're spending more money than we're making. But because they were our only customer, and it was kind of one of those situations where it's like, nobody in our team regrets ending that relationship, but all of us probably were ready to end it sooner. And I probably stuck it out longest to make sure that we had turned over every stone to try to make it work. But it took a lot of not just that, but talking to advisors and saying, should we let go of this? Should I let go of this? Because it's our only revenue and I don't know when we'll get revenue again. And to a person, they said, this is not going to turn out as well as you think, even if you hold on. So that was my second. Just in general, you secure a client and then there's a delay. And then we kind of thought we had sales and then there was a delay. And the starts and stops of getting your company to work the way it needs to, which isn't always what everybody says. So getting sales and getting sales that's right for you are two different things. So the starts and stops have been a little frustrating, although I think now we're operating on kind of all cylinders. I was just doing my CEO review to the founders, and that will go out to investors. And as we've gone through it, we've done a lot in a year and 10 months since I took over. And so I feel this is a good day because you get to kind of take a second and look back and say, okay, this is where we're going. But still, we have to constantly say, well, how long will we go putting money in to try to make this work? And then what is our exit option? Our exit option has always been, once it starts going, we feel that one day it'll be acquired. But do we need to look at that sooner? Do we need to put a sooner time date on that if we don't generate X amount of sales in a certain time period moving forward? And I think that's always a question you have to have. I think for us, we would feel like it's a little bit of sense of failure because we have these kind of goals for it. But on the other hand, it's still an exit. You still learn so much. It still will be a stepping stone to whatever is the next thing for all of us, should that be a scenario that we pursue.
Can you also comment on what has been the impact of your ethnic and cultural heritage? Coming from where you come from, how has that played into your whole entrepreneurial journey?
I think it's a little hard because from our background, there's this push for excellence and success to happen. And so the entrepreneurial journey is so stop and go and squiggly lines and back and forth to get there. It's not a straight line. It's hard to measure success. It's hard to, on a day when you feel like, we're really rocking and rolling here, to explain that to your parents or family or friends, where it's like, yeah, but how much money are you making? Well, can you quit your day job? That's the harder part. On the other hand, I think that our background, particularly the Asian background, it has a very strong work ethic. It's the grinding work ethic, like willing to get into the grind of it. And that, I always laugh and say, like, there's that song, it's the climb. And it's really not, it's the grind, like every day, like successful startups, it's about the grind of it. And you have to be willing to be in the grind for a long time to taste the success. And I think that if you don't keep that in mind and try to have a positive outlook on it, you can feel like you're failing every day, right? Because you're just like, what are you doing? Your family's invested in you and all of this stuff. And they're like, when is this going to happen? My dad and mom, they're just like, so are we going to lose money on this? I don't think so, but I think it's harder. I think it's a little bit harder because there are different expectations that you come to in terms of if you put in the work and you put in the grind, seeing that success of it, seeing the payoff of it, even not success, but the payoff of the work. It's so much longer. And I think, maybe it's different. Maybe it's different if we made a consumer product that, just happens to be shown on TikTok and take off. But that's not the integrity of this company and these founders. The only reason we're here is because we really think this is a huge problem in healthcare and that we're uniquely positioned to solve it appropriately. So I think that's also what makes it harder, is when you're really kind of doing it more out of a altruistic side, knowing that if we solve it right, the money will come. It's very different from making a consumer product or making an app for the Apple Watch and Apple Health or for diabetes or all of that stuff. We're really in the nitty-gritty of operations and what does that mean for patient care? And so that also, I think, when that is your goal, it takes much longer. because we want it to be right for the people who are using it.
And on the flip side, has there been one moment, something particularly noteworthy when everything came together, you felt this is why I'm doing it? One of those highlight moments.
So the client that has been delayed this year but is scheduled to come on board, that's probably a 2 million ARR or so. We had pitched to that CEO either right before the pandemic or right at the beginning about our product. And she kind of didn't get it. It wasn't a match, but it was like, well, keep us posted and all this stuff. We ended up reconnecting with them because they had acquired imaging centers in Dallas and weren't just Houston based. And one of my partners works right next door and started talking to the manager of that company. And so we ended up getting another meeting. At that meeting, the CEO and the head of business development told us our entire pitch back. They basically told us, after we demoed the product, all the advantages of having this product, down to the marketing tool and the reporting data to use it as a marketing metric for their marketers. And I was like, this is going to work. I just got off the phone and I talked to our founders and I said, this is going to work. They just told us everything we envisioned this product doing for them. So that was probably my highlight day. We had let go of our previous client. A month later, got this pitch and they were like, we want it. And this is all the things you're going to replace. And this is how much you're going to save us. We know straight off the bat. And I was like, okay, we're going. So it's been a little frustrating that we haven't got them onboarded yet, but not from our side, from their side, but they still want it. So we know it's out there. That was the best day because we showed our product and we showed it to a decision maker and they were like, yeah, when you don't have to pitch your own product, then you get pretty lucky. Yeah, so that was a great day.
So in conclusion, what words of wisdom would you give to your earlier self or to other entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs in particular, who are maybe earlier on that road than you are?
I would say to them that one, you have to be passionate about your product and what you're doing, why the market needs it. And if you can't answer any of those, like why it's so important to you, why the market needs it, why it's better than everything out there, then you're not ready to go down the path. Because those are the questions that you're going to be asked, like, why should I pay for this? You really have to be passionate and believe in it to stick through the ups and downs to say, no, this is where it's going to be. So if you're not passionate about it, then why would anybody else be that wants to buy it? And the second thing I would say is it feels like it's a lonely road, but it's not as lonely as you think. And I'm just going to circle back to the fact that particularly for female founders now versus when we kind of started down the path a few years ago, or even when I took over during the pandemic as CEO. And prior to that, I had taken over some of the operational stuff. Even then, like 18, 19, there are more support systems for female founders, underrepresented minority founders, African American women, Latin American women, Latinx, because of the pandemic than there were previous. And take advantage of every single one of those you come across. They may not be a perfect fit, but explore them and find out what you can take from them or not to help you move forward. And particularly, what services can you get that are discounted to help you kind of put things in place? We're kind of behind, I feel, a little bit in branding, marketing, and social media. and being able to find people who are freelancers, Fiverr, Upwork, or through these organizations that would maybe do it for free or discounted to like build the relationship so that they could be full-time for you. Those are things that are very important because we kind of build this company piece by piece. First, we made a product. Then we figured out our dev team better. And then we said, okay, we need this person. And then we said, we need to fundraise. And then we said, we need sales. And now we need marketing. But when you are ready with your product, you kind of need to do a little bit of all of that in the beginning, particularly for sales and marketing. So that's something I wish that we had focused on a little earlier at the time when our product was becoming finalized or ready for MVP. And the other thing about that is that I would say, and it's something I do now, but talk to everybody. Everybody. Even if you don't know them, even if you listen to a lecture, go up to them and afterwards and say, can I talk to you afterwards? You said this, can we follow up on that? Maybe they'll give you money. Maybe they'll give you something else. Maybe they'll connect you with somebody. And the final piece of advice I'll tell you, which is advice that was given to me, which is ask for advice and you'll get money. Ask for money and you'll get advice. So if you want money, talk to investors and ask for advice, and they'll start following you and trying to help you. And ultimately, they'll probably invest in you or get you connected to an investor that might help you. So once somebody told me that early in my CEO-ship, that's all I did. Whenever I talk to an investor, unless it's like purely a pitch set up from like New Chip Accelerator, they have an investor relations team. They get us in front of investors. So unless it's something like that, if like somebody says, oh, you should talk to this person and they've invested in this, this, and this, and this, I never ask for money, just ask for advice. And they'll usually try to help you find money.
Aneesa, this has been an amazing conversation. I enjoyed it. I know that a lot of our listeners will. So thank you very much for taking the time to share your thoughts today. And I'm sure that ZipData and you will reach great heights. So you have our best wishes for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's been very enjoyable. I look forward to speaking with you again sometime.
My conversation with Aneesa was enlightening in many ways. The biggest thing was that she and her co-founders recognized early on that the category or vertical that her startup belonged to, B2B SaaS, or software as a service, would need both external funding and a long runway to profitability. Understanding this allowed her to build the patience and the financial resources she needed to build ZipData. Secondly, while she certainly did her own homework on funding terms and issues, she was smart enough not to be penny-wise and pound-foolish and hired excellent legal brains that she felt she could trust to protect her interests in far-reaching ways. And that paid off for her. Lastly, it was instructive to me to learn that organizations and the ecosystem that focus sharply on women and minority entrepreneurs do deliver such outsized value. The challenges we face and even the paths we take to successful entrepreneurship can look so different from the mainstream, and this kind of help can make or break an aspiring entrepreneur. I'll be watching out with a sharper eye for these kinds of organizations, and I'm excited to share them with you in the future. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Find show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achiiv.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcast and never miss another episode. Want to help others like you? Leave us a review and tell a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go achieve.